So I talk a lot about odd time signatures on this channel, and I think for good reason, because odd time signatures are a major element of a lot of progressive music. But sometimes you want to just write a good banging riff in 4/4, and this main riff from my new song Broken Epistemology is all in 4/4. In fact, it's 8 bars of 4/4, which is about as basic of a phrase length as you can get. But there's a couple of things that I like to do to make a riff in 4/4 more interesting and sound still progressive, because I'm not writing, metalcore here. I'm still writing progressive metal. So I'm going to share a couple of the tricks that I like to use when writing riffs in 4/4. The first thing I think about with riffs in 4/4 is offbeats. Now, I am hitting a number of downbeats in this riff. I think 4 of the 8 measures I'm actually hitting the downbeat, but there's a bunch of offbeats as well. The end of the second measure. That big chord there lands on the last 16th note of the second bar and kind of anticipates the next measure. That's highlighted by the drums as well, which I'll talk about later. But having some of these offbeats is going to add some extra syncopation to the riff. I also do a bunch of offbeat 16th notes. So offbeat 8th notes sound cool and groovy. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 but offbeat 16th notes are even more that way. 1 E and a 2 E and a And in the second half of the riff, I do a bunch of these. Almost all of those low notes are offbeat 16th notes, and that adds an extra level of syncopation and grooviness to this riff. I also try to think about having melodic and rhythmic ideas that repeat throughout a riff. Not necessarily that they're going to repeat the same way each time, but it's going to add this extra level of connectiveness to the riff. The main one here is this. That little sliding figure. The first time it starts on beat 2. And the second time around it starts on the and of 3. So it's the same exact riff, but it starts in different places, and it makes it feel a little bit different each time, but it also connects the riff together because you have basically the exact same thing happening twice in the riff. And I like to do this thing where you take a part of a riff and just shift where it starts. So if you start one on the downbeat and then start the next one on the and of 1, something like that, it just helps to add a little bit of variety to the riff. The other thing I do in this riff is this small little rhythmic fragment. It's basically just a gallop. But it happens 4 times throughout the riff. The first one's maybe a little bit different rhythmically, but... And then in the last 2 measures... Now, those aren't really that interesting on their own. They're just little gallop figures, but I'm doing them 4 different times, so that's adding an extra level of cohesiveness to this riff. I also think about trying to have some more interesting chords in a riff like this. Most of this riff is in A Phrygian, and it's all based around your low open string, which is kind of the classic metal way of riffing. That's all in A Phrygian, but I also throw in a few chords that go outside of that. That's a G with B in the bass, first inversion G major chord. This chord happens later in the song. It happens in the chorus as well as the intro and outro. So it's something that kind of connects the song together, but it also goes outside of this key of A Phrygian, which sounds really interesting to my ears. It's kind of like a chromatic passing tone. You have D, C, then B, which then goes to B flat. There's also this chord in the first half. This is just a, A flat power chord or G sharp power chord. That's our chromatic leading tone. It's 1/2 step below our root of A. Kind of helps to just lead your ear back towards that A. And then in the second half of the riff, we have this chord, which is C sharp minor, G flat minor, whatever you want to call it. But that's completely outside of the key of A Phrygian. You could think of it as maybe being from A Lydian, like borrowed from A Lydian, but I'm really treating this as like a chromatic chord. So we have C sharp, then it goes to C in the next measure, then B in the root, and then B flat. So those last 2 measures, they're kind of pulling chromatically back to A. So A is really the root here. It's what your ear is kind of focused around the whole time. But a few interesting chords here and there, to my ears, kind of perk them up and go, oh, that's a little bit different. The last thing I want to talk about is what the other instruments are doing, specifically the drums. Now, the drums are just playing quarter notes for the most part in the hi-hat as well as snare backbeats on beat 2 and 4, but there's a few places where I go away from that to highlight the riff in a cool way. So there's the last 16th note in beat 3 of measure 1, there's the last 16th note of bar 2, and there's a couple of other places as well. I could have had the drums just do a straight rock groove underneath this the whole time, and I think it would have sounded fine. But I'm always thinking of how I can make it sound like the band is one unit all working together to make this music happen, and specifically in a riff like this. So having the drums highlight a few of the cool chords and hits of the riff is just going to make it feel like the music is all working together instead of just kind of laying a foundation for a riff to happen underneath. So I'm very conscious of what drums end up doing because they're like a major factor in how a riff like this can feel. The second time this riff happens after the first chorus, I have the keyboard join in just on a few of the faster runs. Now with the heavy riff like this, you can have the keyboard just lay out. I think that works pretty well, but I wanted to thicken up a few of those runs by having keyboard double them. So here's the whole riff played slowly. So there's a few ideas for writing riffs in 4/4 in progressive metal. I think a lot of people avoid 4/4 in this kind of music, but you don't have to because there's a lot that you can do with it if you know what you're doing. So give a few of these ideas a shot for yourself and let me know if they help you. And as always, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, all of that. Till next time, stay proggy.